Hello, I'm Michelle Rosecrans from the Miami University Alumni Association. Welcome to Alumni Weekend 2021, where we are connecting Miamians everywhere for engaging programming and conversations, and we're celebrating you, our alumni. This session is Exploring Cognitive Diversity and Whole Brain Thinking with presenters Dr. Gillian Oakenful and Professor Cindy Oakenful. Gillian Oakenful is Professor of Marketing in the Farmer School of Business and Director of the new Center for Kick Glass Change. Cindy Oakenful is an Assistant Lecturer in the Human Capital Management and Leadership Department and a Faculty Lead in the First Year Integrated Core at Farmer School of Business. Live viewers, remember that you can submit questions or comments during this session by clicking the Ask a Question button below the video. Let's get started.
Thank you, Michelle. So I should first of all just say that we're coming to you from the new Clifton, Cincinnati campus of Miami University. So Cindy and I, the last name is not a coincidence. We are married. We're both professors at Miami, and so had to revamp our house to become a home learning with our 3 children, but also to have places to teach our students. So I am in the there used to be a bedroom. Cindy is now in the sunroom. So we are together but separate as we go through this. So I have been at Miami for, this is going to be my 24th year. So I've now unfortunately hit that point in time where I'm now getting my former students' children, and that is always a difficult thing to deal with, but also a lovely thing to deal with. I teach mostly our marketing capstone, so our client-centered capstone courses. My students do a lot of work about working across difference. We work with P&G, we work with companies like that on real client-driven projects. And Cindy works in the first year integrated core, which if you don't know anything about it, you should. It's a really innovative program that we were both involved in developing, which is focused on skills. And all of that will come into place in what we're going to teach you today. So I'm just going to share screen. And after a year and a half now, most faculty know how to do it. I'm going to share screen and just take you through this a little bit. So we're going to talk today about cognitive diversity and whole brain thinking. And the reason why this comes into place, we'll first talk about why we use HBDI, so the Herrmann Brain Dominance Instrument. We'll take you through the theory behind it, and we recognize that many of you did the assessment, well done on doing your homework, and some of you even did the e-learning, so you went beyond. Some of you haven't, and the first thing we want to say is that it is open to you. So please take advantage of that. We have a license with Herrmann International, but you get it to do this for free. So we are going to leave that open to you to go in if this piques your interest and you'd like to go in and do the assessment afterwards. And it will take you all the way through your profile. Those of you who did the e-learning, you've seen that. We're going to give you a little bit of theory, 1 minute of theory, which is probably all we need. And then we're going to go on and actually talk a little bit about how you use this, what you can learn about yourself from it. We're also going to give you another opportunity for more. There's even more HBDI sharing that we're going to open up to you. And then talk a little bit about how this relates to you and how you communicate and collaborate with others. And then we'll talk a little bit about what comes next after today's workshop. So first of all, why do we use HPDI? So I mentioned I'm the Faculty Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion for the Farmer School of Business, and this is the ecosystem in which I exist. So the first year integrated core, which is a 4 2-hour classes that all of our first year students in the Farmer School take, they're integrated, has a class which Cindy leads, BUS 101, which has a focus on diversity. And so within that course, these are the topics that they go through. Now, when we designed this, we wanted to think about diversity in a way that was relevant to our students. And part of that is meeting them where they live. The reality is Farmer School students they are 85% white. They are actually 65% male, mainly driven by economics and finance, but on average, 65% male. Most undergraduate programs are about 50-50, and very little diversity. And that we know about Miami and we know about the Farmer School. So when we're thinking about skills, we needed to think about what skills do they need so they are beyond ready for the workplace, for the marketplace and for society. And so one of the things they needed was an exposure to diversity, but in a way that they could that they could get into it, that they could receive, that they could be open to it, and that was focused on skills. And so this is what they do in BUS 101. They take the business case for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So Cindy and her team will lead them through why it is important that companies embrace diversity. And we're talking about linking it to firm performance. We're talking about linking it to innovation. We're talking about why it needs to be there and also why it needs to be managed, right? So having diversity without having inclusion and belonging and really managing the process will lead to things that are not what we want. The second thing here is that we think about diversity in a different way. So we hear a lot about demographic diversity, and we focus on demographic diversity, but that's not where we start. So we start with some of the things that you're going to hear today. We start with the brain. We start with cognitive diversity. And there is cognitive diversity. Each of us has diversity within our own brains and then between. And so that allows us to realize that everybody is involved in any discussion about diversity, and everybody has work to do. And so this idea of cognitive diversity and whole brain thinking is centered on you and what you are trying to do as an individual, and then also centered on how you need the skills you need to have to work effectively with others. The last thing that we do is developing cultural intelligence, and cultural intelligence is focused on adaptability to difference, which is exactly what our students needed. It started as a global concept, and now it's been focused on domestic diversity. But do you have the skills to learn about other cultures? And we define culture very broadly. It can be based on age. You can joke about okay boomer all you want, but when you have to work with one and you're Gen Z, you have to have the skills to do it. It can be defined by even function. It can be defined by nationality, sexual orientation, gender. There are cultural values that are imbibed in all of those that affect how we behave, how we think, our preferences. And so we measure both cognitive diversity and cultural intelligence in the first year. And then we build on it throughout the 4 years. The way we build on it is the Global Miami Plan. So Miami is a liberal arts institution. There's the Global Miami Plan. There are minors, there are majors, there are thematics. There are 600 student orgs that I found that can expose them to difference, expose them to different cultures, different ways of thinking. We're also now starting to infuse CQ into the farmer school curriculum. So as I said, I'm a professor of marketing. We now have a capstone that is called Kick Glass Marketing that is focused on teaching our students how to understand the needs and wants of people who are different from them. We also have a new elective, and we're starting to talk about how to bring it into our Principles of Marketing course so that every farmer school student understands why cultural intelligence is important to marketing. And then the last thing we have is a brand new center called the Center for Kick Glass Change. The idea there is that there needs to be programming for students who want more and who maybe need more. And so these are all going to be credentials, the co-curricular credentials that will be both in the classroom and outside of the classroom on e-learning that our students can take. We are also going to be developing professional versions of these that you as alumni can take. And I'll talk a little bit about this at the end. The idea here is that we assess our students at the beginning of the first year. We assess them again at the end of the fourth year so they can put everything they have done on their resumes and show employers what their CQ is. Right? And we have to, I'm a marketer, we have to think about branding. People are not going to expect this from Miami University, and they're not going to expect it from the Farmer School of Business. And we need to give them tangible evidence that they have done this work. And we need them to be able to show that they are ready to work with difference. So that is where this evolved. And this is one part of this. So what we're talking about today is what our first year students will do within Cindy's course, BUS 101. So a tiny bit of theory. Hopefully you did at least the theory before you took the assessment. So this will give you a little bit of this. And then as you unlocked your assessment, there is also a whole more that you can go to. The idea here is Sperry's model, which, was almost half a decade ago, the idea of right brain, left brain. And one of the things to realize with all of these techniques is it can be used quite negatively to be quite reductionist and stereotyping. And we have to be really careful not to do that, right? So the idea that somebody has left or right brain has not held up held up over time, right? We are more complicated than that, and the brain is more complicated than that. And Ned Herrmann, who was with GE, an engineer in GE, who was already knew that he played music and he was an engineer, so already he knew that he was testing the model, started to look at these different models to see if there was something he could connect to how your brain worked and the type of leader that you were. So he looked at McLean's triune model, which really did look at the evolution of the brain back to reptilian times, the time of dinosaurs, when it was all about fight or flight, and the idea of survival. And there are thinking preferences that are related to that. The limbic system as it evolved to where it was about emotions and affect and how your memory worked. And then finally, the neocortex, which is all about your higher order processing. So speech, logic, higher order thinking. And Ned Herrmann knew that he needed a model that really could incorporate all of these things. And so landed with something after doing many EEG, many, and his daughter, Anne Herrmann, who is now chair, was his subject as this as a child. She has some interesting stories to tell about having all these electrodes all over her head when she'd come back from school. And what he came up with was a model that had 4 quadrants. And what you'll see here is the right brain and left brain are still very much in play, but they're being broken down, right? So we're getting a bit more granularity. You'll also see here that the neocortex mode is up here. So your higher order processing are up here on the top. And then that limbic mode, if you remember, memory, affect, emotions, is down here on the bottom. So I don't want to belabor this too much because hopefully you've done it with the e-learning and it's there for you. The 4 quadrants here, the yellow, D, is going to be, you see, I'm already biased. I started on the one that I'm high on. I should start on blue. Holistic, integrative, integrate. So creativity, strategy. And one of the things that's really interesting about this is that all yellows are not the same and all blues are not the same. So within this yellow, there are actually clusters. And you'll see that as you go through the e-learning, or you'll see it really nicely on the app, that there are actually different types of yellows depending on which of those adjectives you pick that put you in this quadrant. The blue over here is data-based. So our students that are, ISA majors, statistics majors, are probably high blue. So logic-driven, analytics, data-driven, quantitative. Green, sequential, organized, and you already see I'm low green because I started over here on the yellow instead of following the process. So sequential, organized, detailed, planning. They're the people who are looking at the feasibility things. They're known as the executors, right? The people who ultimately get things done. These are the greens. Over here are the yellow, interpersonal, relational, emotional. I will find, having done this with a lot of people in the business school, researchers tend to be blue-green, right? And you can see why that would be. Teachers tend to be over here in the yellow, right, as you're going through this. So this is metaphorical. Your brain is not split up in these 4, but there is a recognition that our thinking preferences tend to fall within here. So Cindy is now going to take you through what we mean by preferences and dominance.
Well, thank you everyone for being here. And before I get too far into that, I just want to maybe give a little, a brief overview of why we think this is important to do with our first-year students. We believe it really helps give you a better understanding of yourself and others. It also gives them language to explain their thinking to others. We see that it enhances communication and interpersonal effectiveness, which is critical in any kind of team setting. And therefore, we see enhanced productivity, whether it's within teams or at organizational levels. So that's the purpose of why we go through it. And then, a few things that I want to reiterate that this is not. This is not meant to fix anybody. It's really meant to be to help improve your life in terms of how you can communicate and relate to others that are different from you. Each quadrant that Gillian just took you through is different, but of equal importance. So there is no one quadrant that is better or worse than the other. They're all equally important. This tool does not define our abilities. So while it's going to give you insight into your preferences and dominance, it doesn't actually measure your skill or competency in these areas. So even if you are high blue brain, that does not guarantee that you're going to be good at math or you have technical skills, right? So we also make sure our students understand that this is not an excuse to avoid doing critical tasks. If you happen to be very low dominance or preference in one quadrant, it doesn't mean you avoid it. It's the opposite. We're highlighting it to show you how you're going to have to stretch and consciously move into those quadrants. It's not a test that will define your personality. Gillian mentioned this already too. You will find that even if you have similar dominance to other people in those quadrants, you might question, why are we so different? And that's because it's not a personality test. And then even within your preferences in those quadrants, those can vary quite drastically. And ultimately, this is not, we don't do this to judge others, but hopefully through this presentation, we do like to have a little fun as we're kind of pointing things out about people who do have, that we recognize with high dominance in these areas. And then finally, the ultimate goal in this is to make sure that everyone understands that you have access to your whole brain. So while you have a dominance in a particular area or maybe multiple quadrants, you can equally develop skills in those other quadrants. It just takes a little bit of time and concentration. So when we talk about dominance, what we do know is that anytime there's multiple anything that we have on our body, whether it's 2 hands, 2 feet, 2 eyes, 2 ears, our brain has a default dominant one of those. And this happens unconsciously for all of us. So I like to, as we go through this too, I like to use the left hand, right hand dominance example. It is, if you happen to be right-handed, it is very likely that your penmanship is much better with your right hand than it is your left. And that is not to say that your left hand couldn't be equally capable of writing. It's just that anytime you went to perform that task, that was your default. And as a result, the skills needed to execute on that, you honed, you gave it practice. What we argue with whole brain thinking is once you understand the importance of needing to use both hands, and I'm going to switch from left hand, right hand, from writing to, let's use a sport analogy. Let's say basketball. Anybody who's ever played basketball before recognizes that you can only play basketball at a certain level with just your right hand, right? If you want to excel in this sport at any competitive area, you've got to be able to use both. And it probably took you a lot more effort to develop your left hand than it did your right, if you are right-handed. We are suggesting the same thing. We like to highlight these for students so that they understand the areas where they're going to have to flex, maybe, and be a bit more conscious and deliberate about it. Because in the contemporary business environment, we see that your ability to flex into all these areas are critical. So you can't play or you can't engage in certain tasks if you can't use your left hand, much like on the basketball court. Okay. So, Gillian, you can go back one slide. Sorry, I apologize. So lastly, the impact of this, I just want to, why we talk about thinking styles is that, it will influence the way in which the skills we choose to develop, where we find our interest, and ultimately that'll show up sometimes in the work that we choose to do, or the expertise that we choose to gain. All right, you can go forward. There are so many different aspects of whole brain thinking that we touch on, but for our time today, we can't touch on everything. So I'm gonna spend a little bit of time talking about how these thinking preferences show up in the way we choose to communicate. So for those of you, hopefully the majority of you have already gone through the e-learnings and you've already gotten some understanding. Gillian did a quick high level, but let's use the blue quadrant as an example. Our blue quadrant, if you have a dominance in this area, what you'll find is that this is our rational self. This is our logical, analytical, fact-based, quantitative self. And when we communicate, what we like to do is we like to use facts to illustrate points. We tend to be very straightforward. We apply logic, and oftentimes we display little to no emotions, regardless of the situation. And and in return, when we're listening, we like it when people communicate with us that they're brief and to the point. Get to the bottom line. We like really well articulated ideas and data that that you're making your points with data. The exact or potential, the quadrant that has the biggest potential points of conflict for our blue dominant brains happens to be our red dominant brain. So on the opposite axis there. And our red dominant pretty much likes to communicate in exact opposite ways of our blue dominant. So these are individuals that tend to have a really animated face. They use a lot of hand gestures or nonverbal gestures. They love to make points, not with facts and data, but by telling stories. And oftentimes they like to talk out loud in order to learn. So they're often thinking out loud is terms that we used to say. And when they're listening to you, what they want is they want empathy. They want involvement from others. They'll pull people in. They like a personal touch. Eye contact is really important. These are often people that will reference other people in conversation often. And they really enjoy passionate, emotional content. So we see between the blue and red that just in communication, this can create big points of difference and conflict. And it also shows up in decision making. You can see where when it comes time to make a decision, our blue dominant brain wants to make a very objective, clear, black and white decision based on really objective criteria, where our red dominant brain wants to consider the situation, wants to, pull other people in and get their perspective on it. They want to, understand the ripple effect of this decision. Who else could this decision impact? So we see the biggest point of conflict there. When we move over to our green quadrant, so this is our what we call our safekeeping. Our green brain makes sure that we are taking care of things. These are individuals in their communication that like to speak in complete sentences and paragraphs. They really process everything very sequential. They're concrete, and the questions that they want answered when they have them are who, when, how, and what and where. What they never tend to ask is why. And they are on the extreme axis of our yellow brain dominance. Our yellow brain dominance speaks in phrases. They can stop mid-sentence just because they assume you can fill in the rest. They're very abstract. They like to use metaphors and very lyrical often with their words. And the only question that they really want to know in communication is why. What's important about this? Where are we going? How does this fit into our vision? So with this, we see in addition to decision making, potential points of conflict we see between our green dominant brains and our yellow dominant brains are how we navigate through spaces and time. So our green dominant, like if we're looking at physical spaces, everything has its place and should be in its place. The yellow dominant brain are individuals that don't worry about where things belong until they need them. And then when we talk about time, yellow likes things to be really unstructured. Green wants to know what's happening when and for how long and exactly. So we see amongst when there's communication, you could have, if you have a really high dominant green individual, let's say somebody that is a supervisor for somebody else, and they're giving instructions, they are really taking the joy out of the task. They're given down to the detail that leaves the yellow brain no room to kind of figure it out on their own. Or vice versa, if it's a yellow brain manager sharing with a subordinate, they're giving, a big picture, like here's what I want done with no instructions, no directions. And that green brain dominant individual is really stressed out by that. They need more tangible, concrete, what's the process, what's the end game. And we actually see that a lot with some of our students. So yeah, you could go to the next one.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
So what we'd actually like to do now is for you to, that's why we actually wanted you to take your assessment. This is far more fun. You know, we all like to know about ourselves. So what we would like to do, I'm going to switch over now. So I'm going to unshare and reshare and actually take you to the Thinker portal. While we're doing this, what we would like you to do is to pull up your own HBDI results, whether you're doing it in the portal or if you've gone ahead and actually downloaded the mobile app. If you would pull up your own results, so that you can look at this, especially as we go into some of the applications. So I'm going to unshare here and just take us through to the portal.
Michelle, if there's a question, this would be a great time for us to pause and take one so that we're not moving forward with things left unclear.
That's awesome. So before I share the question with you, I just want to note that I feel very yellow in listening to this. I didn't have a chance to take the assessment, but I feel very yellow, and I'm trying to categorize all my coworkers. So this is fun. But we had 2 questions come in, and they're basically the same question. How does HBDI relate to or layer with Myers-Briggs? I know that's one that a lot of people are familiar with. So there's the question.
So I'm going to let Cindy answer that because she has used Myers-Briggs quite a bit in her corporate life, and so is very familiar with both of them.
Yeah, so you know, all of these tools, I just love all these tools. So everything, you know, Myers-Briggs is another great one to give some insight into that. So it isn't in competition with it. What, you know, it's a different way of looking at it. It doesn't break it down into the quite same categories, but if I were to kind of give you an example, what you would find is groupings can be shared. So for those of you familiar with Myers-Briggs, if you were a thinker, you would probably fall more into the rational, the blue quadrant, right? Our data analytical side of things. If you are a feeling individual, you'd probably fall more into the red quadrant. Your S versus a J, your S is definitely going to fall more into the green quadrant, and your judgmental is definitely going to fall more into the yellow. So they do touch on similar things. They're slightly different. I think Myers-Briggs really gives you specific, if you are these, this combination of letters, this tells a lot about you. Why we like the broadness of Myers-Briggs is because it's really more about what types of thinking activity takes place in those different quadrants, and it encourages you. It doesn't label you. It helps you understand maybe why you don't spend as much time there, or how you need to adjust your communication to people that might have that kind of preference to be more effective. So it's not kind of, you know, this doesn't give you this is who you are and this is how you'll be. This gives you insight into the ways you do kind of do things now, and some reason behind maybe why you gravitated towards science or why you gravitated towards English, but for certain tasks, why it's important for you to stretch into those other areas, and you absolutely can. So that's part of why we like it a little bit better than Myers-Briggs. It's not a definitive as Myers-Briggs.
I think the other part I would add to that would be, you know, we are taking these as especially first years and saying, here's what you need to aspire to be, right? So what are the skills you need to be? And one of those is the idea of being a whole brain thinker. And so everything we do, we want to start with an assessment, right? So the idea is it's awareness. So creating that awareness. And the things that I know for me that I like about this is there's a journey there that you can take right from that awareness. So some of the tools we're going to show you today as well, that's part of why I love it. It's what you can do with it, that allows you to, we're going to show you some of these as we go through as well. But I think you can find application for all of these as we're going through. So I'm going to put up the Thinker Prota. So hopefully you've all been in here. You would have seen this, the introduction when you took the assessment. You went through these two, and then you open up yours. So for those of you who maybe haven't done this yet, you take these after you take the assessment, and then you start on this debrief, and it will take you through your results. So I'm going to go in here to where you would have started to explore. And Cindy, I believe this is your profile. So if you'll just take us through the first couple of steps of this.
Yeah, and why we want to take time to show you the portal today is one, some of you might have completed the A-learnings, others haven't, but where you can find really a robust and personalized amount of information about you. So, what you're getting today in this workshop is super brief, super high level, but there's an enormous amount of insight out there for you to gain. So in this portal, what you'll find, and I am, you'll see, sorry, Gillian, I can't see that. Let me make that bigger on my screen. You'll go into your profile, and within your profile, what you will first want to, the first thing that we want you to understand is your preference code. So one of the things that's really important about, the Herrmann tool is that, very few of us are just singular dominant, right? We have maybe preferences in one or two or three. Some of you, very few of them might even have all four as preferences. But what you'll see is that you have some preference in all of those. Some are more dominant than others, but we all have access to our full brain. And so that preference code gives you a highlight. That's really your HBDI profile. So in my case, I'm a 2-1-1-1. I think Gillian is a 1-2-2-1. That is what you would refer to as your preference code. If and if you click the level in terms of the degree of your dominance is what's underneath that preference code, which is your profile score. So those raw numbers show to the degree of your dominance in those areas. So while I'm a 1 in 3 of those, I'm clearly have a much higher dominance in some than the others. And a rule of thumb that we typically find with these profiles is that if you have a score in the high 80s, 90s, or above in any one of these quadrants, it's most likely that the people close to you or the people that you engage with know this about you. You leave lots of clues behind about your dominance in these areas. So, after you complete your e-learning module and you learn a bit more about those quadrants, it's a great way to go test that out and see what people say about you. I bet you it would align with your dominance areas really well. So as you click through those, and if you clicked each of those, quadrants, you, I believe, get additional information as well. If you go to the next one, Gillian, on the left, the least preferred and most preferred, what this does show you is that it highlights your most preferred quadrant and your least preferred quadrant. And what you'll typically find is that, your most preferred quadrant is generally where you start. This is kind of like your base. I have 3 dominant quadrants, but my home base tends to be red. And it will, as you click, and it'll give you a little bit more information about your dominant and your least dominant and the areas specifically to you based on how you filled out that survey. The one thing I will also say, we do get some questions about, people often say, well, can my kite change? Do my preferences change? What if I was taking this and I was thinking more in my personal life and then work life? All of those things kind of, that can influence it. More often than not, over 2 million people have taken this assessment. It has been scientifically validated. What we do see is that there's most of you, even if you take this many times over the course of your, I've taken it probably 5 or 6 times, while the slight shifts in my quadrants might change, my profile score really doesn't. So I never have all of a sudden become a really strong blue. But again, that's about a preference. It doesn't mean I'm not good in math, or I haven't developed that, or I don't understand about the importance of strategic goals. That's the skill side we're saying, right? But your preferences usually don't change over the course of time. And Gillian, I'll pass it over to you. You could talk about, with the exception of when we are under
pressure. And this is one of my favorite parts of this tool. So you would have noticed when you were taking the assessment that you were asked to choose between 2 adjectives. And what they were trying to do there was to create tension. force you into choice and see how you respond under pressure. And that data is then used to map this. So that was Cindy when she's calm. This is Cindy when she's under stress. So what you'll see here, if you can see the, and I'll try and zero in on it a little bit here. So what you'll see is that the kite changes. And what happens when Cindy is under pressure is she becomes less yellow. So less holistic, less big picture thinking, less conceptual. So she moves away from that under stress, and then shifts towards, I was going to say even less blue. That's showing my bias a little bit, but less blue, a little less blue, a lot less yellow, and then shifts towards the green, so the safekeeping, and shifts towards red. So she's shifting now away from those other ones. So the other thing you'll see is becoming more lower modal, which if you remember, moving away from the neocortical to the limbic, right? So again, a little less evolved in the thinking. And again, I think you see this sort of fight or flight idea under stress coming. The important thing to remember here, I think, is when you think of the world that we are living in, and we talk about this with the students, this is no longer a case where every now and again we're under stress. And every now and again, we're under pressure. For many of us, this is how we're operating all the time. And I know for many of us over the last year in particular, right? And so this is where we really need to pay a lot of attention to these, because this actually may be where we are. And we tend to go more to the extremes when we're under pressure. So again, you'll see that there's a shift, right? So she has gone from the 1-2-2-2 and shifted down to where she's much higher on the red and much higher on the green, and shifted down off of the 1 on the yellow to a 2. And so this is something that we really need to be aware. We talk about this with our students because as they near deadlines, this really gets exemplified, right? These differences start to come into play, and their thinking preferences change. And so it's, how do you set this up so you relieve that pressure if you don't like where you go under pressure? How are you aware of these things? So again, on an individual level, we're looking again at individual growth, individual awareness, and how this tool can really help you towards those skills. If you look at this, if whole brainness is ultimately the idea, then under stress, again, the tendency is to become less whole brain, right? So how do we mitigate that? How are we aware of that when there's stress there that we can't relieve, or how do we do something to avoid that stress as we're going through?
And I will just jump in and add one other point. Some of you, as you look at your kites, mine wasn't that extreme. Some of you might find that under pressure, you do go to really extreme in the opposite direction of maybe where your current kite is. And what's interesting about that is, or what you should be mindful of, how your interaction and engagement with people changes at that point too. That's particularly important in team settings where people are used to working with you in a certain way and engaging with you in a certain way. And then when you're under pressure, what changes? What are you now asking for that you weren't previously? And sometimes people are caught by surprise when we have those preference shifts.
Okay, and I'll go into this a little bit more when we do a little bit more of the applications as well. So then if you go through here, so some of you would already go in, it shows again your which mode you tend to prefer. So Cindy tends to be more right mode. And then also the clusters. These are really interesting. So I will say I haven't shown mine. I'm blue-yellow. So Cindy and I are both high yellow, but you will find that I have different adjectives that would be bolded here than Cindy, and we see that showing up, and I'll show that to you a little bit later in terms of which are our preferences. So even though somebody may be yellow, the clusters that they have within that quadrant may vary. So you can go in there and see those, and the app actually does a really nice job of breaking those out. If you put it on landscape mode, you'll be able to see that here. So here's other information: how I see myself, how I am at work, your full profile, your energy level. And this is another one that's come out a lot over this last year, right? The power of the introvert. We've all been forced to be introverts at some level. This is data that Herrmann collects, and it's sort of an interesting thing as you're going through here. They don't put too much of a tool in this, but just all of this data is here for you. Then if you click on here, and I think this is where Herrmann is moving more and more towards this, is what do we do with this information? How do we use it? And so if you click through here, It gives you a little bit of information on your preference code, talks about how this shows up in communication. I think what's really helpful here is we tend to know what we are. We may not be so great about realizing what we don't do. And so, you know, a fish doesn't know it's wet. And so here's where we're wet. So what we may overlook, right, as we're going through, again, thinking differently. So again, thinking about this is where you need to stretch through, right? So if you overlook this, how do you ensure that in your communication, you're not overlooking the blue? Right, in your problem solving. So for Cindy, because she's lower on blue, most of the things that might be overlooked are going to be related to that blue analytical as you're going through here. So you'll see each of these because she's high on the other three. For me, I'm low on red and green. So I would have probably more down here in terms of potentially what I could overlook because I'm very top modal as we're going through. Okay, so I am going to switch out of here now and go back to the slides. Just give me 1 second. And take you through, this is where, you know, you have these things in your life or in your job where you realize that you're doing the thing you should be doing. And this is for me what I love to do. So we do this with our students. We put them in teams. We don't put them in teams by their whole brain thinking, right? We don't create whole brain teams in that way because that's too artificial. But what we do is we put them in the teams and then we get them to think about the diversity that's within the team and how do they harness that? How do they take what's in the team and use it to the best of their ability? And then how do they also foresee problems that may come because of that diversity, right? So we've done things like taking this and creating rules of engagement, creating social contracts, but giving them the data about each other. And this is a way that this tool is used an awful lot within organizations. So teams can actually start to do that work potentially before they have problems so they can mitigate those before they go in. So Cindy and I did our certification at the same time, and our parting gift from our facilitator was actually a pairs profile. So this is what we got, and so you'll see here. So this is just the two of us. That we're actually pretty whole brain, right? We do pretty well if you look at this. So great whole brain team, good problem solving, good communication skills. As a pair, it would seem that we skew red. When we're under pressure, so that's something to be aware of. But you'll see on the aggregate, it looks like we're pretty balanced as we go through here. But a researcher will always tell you that averages don't tell you anything. And this is really where we are, right? So you've seen, I think, both of our profiles. So I am high, you'll see up here, I am high blue, yellow, and lower on red, green. And Cindy is high yellow, red, green, and lower on the blue. So there are a couple of things to take into consideration here. If you remember when Cindy went through in the 4 quadrant slide, she talked about the ones that are oppositional that may cause some tension, right? So it's not just what your profile is, it's where the differences may be. And this is what we talk about with our students. So when we got this, actually that weekend, Cindy and I sat down with this and had, by the way, they do use this for couples therapy. That's not what it is, but it has been used for this. But it takes the blame away from everything when you see somebody's brain, right? When you see their thinking preferences and you start to see why somebody approaches things the way that they do. So on the blue here, I'm the purple, and you'll see I'm higher blue. Cindy is lower blue. And Cindy is higher green. And I'm lower green, and probably of our differences, that's where our differences show up most. You'll see that we are both high yellow, but as I said before, we are different kinds of yellow. And then Cindy also then has the fun that she inside has the tension because she is high yellow and high green. And I don't have that same tension with blue and with red. I'm not pulled between the two. I'm primarily facts and analytics over the emotional and over the relational. And as you can imagine, that has its own drawbacks to be married to me. But this is who we are as two individuals, right? So the aggregate shows you something, and it shows potentially what your potential is, but you have to break it down to the two parts as we're going through it. So I'm just going to take you through, and all of these tools can be used. We can go in there and we can create these tools. So what we do is we actually create these for our students. So now you'll see maybe why we as a pair go high red under pressure. What actually happens is I am an iceberg and don't move at all under pressure, which again can have its own problems. Cindy goes high red, less blue, and remember I'm blue and stay blue. Cindy goes less blue, and comes down a little from yellow, which is what we have in common. And if you remember in the kite, goes a little further green. So where we were shared, she's now moving away from that. Where I'm low relative to her, she goes further that way with the red and the green. So now you can start to see where there could be potential for stress, right, within these working relationships. And remember, again, diversity is linked to innovation. It's linked to problem solving. So when we are operating in this mode, when we're operating here, you know, we're winning the world. But if we don't recognize these differences, especially when we're under pressure, that's when the problems start to become in any type of diverse situation. And the other thing this does is, you know, demographically, we are very, very similar, but it shows, again, the cognitive diversity that shows up and that needs to be managed as we're going through. So this is how we really are under pressure, right? Which is where we are, for example, when we're getting ready for a workshop together and we're trying to get our 3 kids out to tennis and out to swim and out to a soccer camp while we're doing it. This is the mode that we're in, and this is what shows up, right? And hopefully because we've done this, we're aware of these, but it does give you something to go back to and think about when you're seeing somebody's behavior. You now have a reasoning for it. You have an idea too, if you've gone through it, how to then react to it and how to manage it within it, or to avoid the pressure as you're going through. So just to give you
Gillian, I also say, or how to leverage it, right? Like when the situation needs one of the other, it's knowing that, right?
And while it's not skills, we do know who would prefer, right, to be working in different areas, and so we have that information as well. Here, I love this chart. So this is this to me is really says it all. And remember, one of the things that we use this for also is to introduce the idea of bias. Right. And we know we live in a world of, you know, confirmation bias, where we all have our social media bubbles that feed us information that we all agree with. We also have similarity bias. So we are in bubbles, and we can now create these worlds where we keep everybody else who's different from us out. And so one of the ways we use this to introduce the idea of bias, we use this, right? So what you're seeing here are 2 people who think differently. And then what there is then, whenever there's difference, there's a chance for bias, because our brains like similarity. And so there's bias. And this is one of the places where it shows up, because we put a balance on things, right? So my way is the best way. So as we approach things, I think this shows up as we are working together more than anything else, which is your steps that you go through in approaching something. So for Cindy, she will start with the green. She needs to know the how, the what, the everything but the why, the details, right? She needs to understand it. We need to sit down. We need to write it down. And I am starting, and remember, yellow and green are diametrically opposite. I want to start over here in the yellow. I really want to start. I have a 33. I really want to start here. And Cindy wants to start here. And if you look at my chart, I want to end there. Right? So we are very different in how we comfortably will approach something, right? Based on our thinking preferences, if we are not trying to stretch, right? And so that is the whole point of it. This is sort of our natural mode. But I know if I am working with somebody who is different from me, I know that I can't just go into it and do it my way. Right? So Cindy will want to get the details, the safekeeping, the planning, the organizing. She wants to sit down and do that. If I am thinking about this and I am biased, I am up here with all my great ideas and all my innovation that are just going to change the world. And she wants to bring me down here in the weeds and just rain on my parade.
And suck the joy out of everything.
Well, I never said that, but so that's where we are, because I'm flying high here. You know, I've got this great idea, right? And now you're going to make me fill in all the spaces that I am very comfortable having. Those will get filled as I go through my process, right? But Cindy needs those details, right? I tried to say that without sounding biased. Cindy needs the details. And this for me was really revelatory, I have to say, when we sat down and did this and understood that, right? And understood that I had to push myself and stretch myself to put more of those details into what I was explaining, because otherwise she would ask me so many questions while I'm in my space that I would get exasperated. And so I need to have pushed myself out from yellow through to my green so that I could give her more of a full picture of what I was thinking as I was going through. The other thing is red. right? So red is a big place of difference. Cindy is going from green to red. These are the last two things I'm going to get to, right? So for me, the relational, emotional part of it is really not very important. And you can see, without me going into too many details, how that can cause an issue. Now that doesn't mean I'm always operating in this. This means that these are my thinking preferences. Clearly, I'm ultimately a teacher. Clearly, I have to be thinking about other people. I spend all of my days thinking about how I want them to go out into the world and the skills that they need. But this is where I would be if I wasn't thinking about it and wasn't thinking about how I need to stretch in different situations. So if you think about a team working together, we have teams of 4 or 5 students. Cindy, I think sometimes you have bigger teams than that. So each team member has this as what their preference is. And so we make them sit down and think about, okay, what's a process for us that works there? The other thing we do in teams is make them aware of which tasks require which kind of thinking. But what we don't allow them to do is reduce themselves to their profiles, right? So often you get this where, oh, I'm a red. I can't do that. That's data. I can't do that. I'm a red. I'm a yellow. We're in the stretch business, right? So the idea is that we want everybody on that task and we want everybody stretching. And perhaps initially some of you will enjoy it more than others because your thinking preferences are there, but we are talking about developing skills. So this again gives you the awareness. But what we are looking at is whole brain. What we are looking at in teams are whole brain processes as we go through there. And then this is us under stress. It just gets worse, really. So now Cindy's starting way red. So where she wants to start is absolutely where I'm ending up. I'll just leave that. That doesn't look so good for us, Cindy. So now we're looking at under pressure, right? But this is, again, where we are. So I talked about having 3 kids. We had 3 kids that we had remote learning for this whole year, and we were teaching at home. This is where we were operating. And every decision we made, every problem we needed to solve, we needed to recognize that our natural processes would tend to be different. And so we have to constantly be stretching. If we're going to be functional, if we're going to take advantage of having 2 very different types of brains that have developed different skills. And that's exactly what we're trying to get across to our students as we're going through it. And the part of this is that if Cindy doesn't want to get the data, I get the data, right? And I bring it in. And so we create a process that works for both of us as we're going through. Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I think you've done a good job.
Okay. Okay, thanks. All right, so what's next? Okay, so my green brain, my stretch to green has kept us on time. So we like to talk a little bit, for those of you who have not taken the assessment, I think you'll see it's fun. I hope you go in there and do it. It's normally a tool that costs quite a lot of money if you were to do it outside of the university. We have a license with the university, so do take advantage of it. The digital tool is wonderful. We also wanted you to see just how we are using technology now. So the last year really forced us to do this. Fortunately, we had already planned to do this e-learning before that. Cindy's class actually adopted it before the rest of the world had started. They were early innovators on this, and Herrmann let them use it early. So we had that in place. What Cindy does in the class is then follow it up with this type of application as you're going through. So Cindy's going to take it. Yeah.
Before we move forward, I think there are some questions. Maybe we should address that before we get into school things.
Great. Absolutely.
Yes, we've had quite a few questions come in. I do want to note for the folks who are watching who've had sort of logistical questions that we will send a follow-up email after this to remind you where you can find certain things and that kind of stuff. So I know you talked about stretching from what your dominant color is. But a question from Gary was, through effort and work, can a person modify their profile? Maybe Gary's mostly red, predominantly red, and he doesn't want to be. I don't know.
Yeah. No, so Gary, that's an interesting question. So the profile, again, just to reiterate, it's not about any kind of ability. It doesn't measure ability, competency, skills. It just measures, it just highlights default thinking areas. Like if absent of anything else, these are the types of things that you would, or ways in which your thinking would naturally gravitate. So yes, through, I ran business units prior to coming to Miami, and that required a lot of blue brain, right? So it's my lowest thinking preference dominant, but absolutely can develop skills in there. And we see this all the time. Gillian, she's in the marketing department, and she has a lot of, really, you could get green brain individuals in there, but that do really well because they've developed their creative thinking skills. Wouldn't you say that, Gillian? It's less being concerned about whether or not your profile will change, and more about, if these are my natural defaults, how do I make sure that I'm not, again, only developing my right hand to write with, right? That I stop and think, let me use my left hand today so that I can develop skills and competencies in those areas.
That's great.
Yeah.
And a good reminder that part of this session title is whole brain thinking.
Yeah.
Right. So the profile is the starting point, right? Not the end point. The profile is the awareness, right? And that is natural to you. And those are your thinking preferences, so they will stay there. And I think about it in terms of where you get your energy. So for me, I clearly, my goal is to be a 1-1-1. So where do I need to, I need to work on the green. So I have to stretch in green, and I have to stretch in red. Right. So Cindy is naturally a high red. So if I think about a day where I have had to do a lot of interpersonal work, a lot of relational work, I'll do it well because I'll strive to do it well. But I'll be exhausted at the end of the day. Right. And I know there's introvert, extrovert put in there as well, but I am working. Right. I am working and I am stretching in a way that somebody who is high red is rubbing shoulders and winking and just loving it. Right. For me, I have worked at it. Right. And I mean, I am an Irish English Brit who came here deliberately because I knew US culture were more outgoing and more confident. And I knew I wanted to get some of that. Right. So it's very deliberate. So this is a starting point for you. The goal is not to change your profile. The goal is to take what the profile tells you and know, how do I get to that 1-1-1 in practice? Right. Situationally, how do I stretch? That's really what we're talking about.
That's fantastic. And then I'll just relay one more question before you get back to what you have. A question came in from Carl, who asked, is this concept being offered within teacher education? It seems like it could be useful in classroom situations.
I'll let the director, I'll let you talk about that.
So I assume you mean within EHS, within education. Yes. We have pockets of people around the university who use this. We have, I know so EHS just had a new dean, and I'm very excited that they are somebody who is a big believer in cultural intelligence. And I think all of these tools start to come along. So I'm sort of excited about whether the Farmer School and EHS could start working on that. I'm going to brag a little bit and say I think the Farmer School actually is leading with this a little bit. And our goal actually, and my goal with the center, which I'll talk about in a second, is to actually provide this to the university. We think somebody needs to take the lead. Somebody needs to be a champion of it. And so what we're trying to do with the center is provide all these tools for everybody. There are costs to this, right? And the costs can be quite prohibitive. And so how do we do this in a way that we can provide these to the rest of the university? And so that's the goal actually of the Center for Kick Glass Change. We're probably doing more of it in the Farmer School than most. We have a license. I know they do it in CCA. So within arts management, they do it. A lot of things, I think, just like many things, are there individual faculty who are interested in it and in applying it. And so you'll find it showing up in different classes around. But we are probably the only ones who have said every student gets it, right? Now the job is, how do we get people to apply it as they go up through the curriculum? So we're probably doing more with it than most.
I think that actually leads into, I know I said I had just one question, but another one came in while we were speaking. And Jeff asked, how do you prepare your students to work with managers or colleagues once they're out of school who aren't as aware of this type of thinking or this approach, and who may be, not approaching it as the two of you do, who are aware of one another and how you plot on the chart and where you need to stretch and where you don't, how do people go out into the world and use this with folks who don't know it.
Who don't know, right? So, John, I'll start, and then you kind of fill in the gaps for me. What if we had more time with you? We would do what we do with our students, where we show them how to identify potential preferences in other people by the clues they leave behind, the questions they ask you, the type of things that like particularly that that resonate with a boss or supervisor, so that you can adjust. This is like, having this information is powerful. If you have it, not just about yourself, but you can start recognizing others. You can start adapting. And Gillian, I think this is part of, you're going to talk about whole brain presentations, but making sure that you are communicating with people in ways that are going to be effective. So we do spend more time in doing that. We just didn't have the time today to go through that.
Yeah, I'll lead on with that. So I said I teach the marketing capstone. So my students at the end of the semester are regularly presenting to senior directors at P&G, right? Which I'm just immensely proud at the work that they do. But you don't know who's in the room, and you don't know what their brain is. So if it's a CFO, they're probably red-blue. They're probably blue-green, but you've got the creative director who's maybe more yellow. You might have HR. You've got all these different people, and you have to put a whole brain presentation together, right? And you can't put a presentation that just is suitable for your brain. So we also focus on, how do you make sure that you have a presentation that has data, right? So we have budgets, we have timelines, and we have all those details there that somebody who is naturally high yellow maybe wouldn't think about, right? So how do we make sure? So I am giving them the recipe for a whole brain. So when I give them the template of the presentation, it's a whole brain presentation. And maybe not everybody in the room needs everything that's there, but everybody is getting what they need, right? So it's getting our students to think about that as well in their application. And I love these questions. Keep them coming. I love the questions.
Now, did you have more slides you wanted to go through?
Yeah.
I could keep relaying questions, but I think we can also address a lot of these and some follow-up information.
We are actually just about to finish.
Yes, we are.
So if you just want to, so one of the things we wanted to show was, if you go back in, I asked you not to do the understanding others. This is a brand new tool that Herrmann has made available. We now encourage you to do that. Cindy, do you want to just speak, maybe just abstractly a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this part of that e-learning module, that last component there, is really more self-reflection, and it helps you really identify more of yourself in this. So it'll ask you questions that'll articulate ways in which you prefer to communicate, or triggers in your communication, things that like put you off, or ways in which that it helps you build trust with others. So it's far more self-reflective, but you have the option at the end that allows you to, I encourage everybody to go through the exercise, but if you wanted to share that with others, it would allow you to do so. And the idea is, if there are others in this profile, and in the database, they can, if they're going to come to, if they're going to be on a team with Gillian, you know what, I'm going to just pull up Gillian's profile here, and I'm just going to understand her a little bit better, so that I'm preparing for that interaction and that engagement. And this is new. We'll start to build this amongst our students. We put them in team projects their first semester in the business school, but it takes them all the way through their whole 4 years. So them having access to these kind of team information and dynamics, but it's all optional, the sharing. Nobody has to do that. You don't have to do it, but the exercise of going through that might be really interesting for you.
And so the other thing I would like to just very, very quickly here, I am a professor of marketing, so I have to do a quick plug. So the Center for Kick Glass Change was established in the midst of the pandemic. So we really will be starting to launch in the fall. And so what you see today, the idea here is that while Cindy's students get, they get the coverage of this cognitive diversity and whole brain thinking, they get the business case for DEI, they get CQ foundations. Other Miami students do not. The one thing we have learned over this year is how to create these micro credentials, e-learning, asynchronous, synchronous, how to do that. So we're also going to be extending those to professionals. With our Miami now has a professional group that's doing this. So in the fall, these will be coming out. So if you would like to look for those, we'll be taking what we do in the classes. And then over winter term, if you're aware, in our classes, we have three-week winter term in January. We're going to be then following up. So for those students that Cindy has in her class, we're tasking them with how do you develop your CQ, your cultural intelligence, over the next 4 years. So what we will have for the center are micro-credentials that they can take to help them do just that. So if you take the CQ Foundations, that's a whole other workshop I'd love to do. You can take that course, learn about your cultural intelligence, put a plan together, and then you could take the follow-up CQ Accelerator, which takes you along the next path to this. Dialogues Cross Difference, extremely powerful. A run through the Center for American and World Cultures. We're going to create a winter term for that, and we're going to create a professional one for that. And the last one is Breaking Bias, which again builds off of these platforms and these stepping stones that we've developed in these first credentials to start to move into to cultural bias, to demographic bias, experiential bias, and really thinking about how do you identify your bias, because we all have it. Every brain is biased. How do we identify it? How do we label it? And how do we mitigate it? So we're starting to build up through to eventually, for our students, they'll be in really immersive activities, but we want to take them through so they're ready. So that's the goal of this. So now that we have your emails, we'll certainly let you know of these and let you know when they're available. And that's it, Michelle.
Oh, Michelle,
I'm so sorry, I was muted.
There we go.
Somebody's got to do it once.
Presentation without someone who's muted when they're not supposed to be. Oh, if only that were the first time. So this does bring us to the end of exploring cognitive diversity and whole brain thinking. Thank you, Dr. Oakenful and Professor Oakenful, for what you have taught us today. The two of you are a really fantastic team, and it's been a pleasure to host you for this session. So to our viewers, if like me, you want to learn more about this topic, the presentation will be available on our website for a rewatch, and be on the lookout for more information in your email inbox with additional details. Our next Alumni Weekend session is a wine tasting session with Jack Keegan at 7 p.m. Eastern this evening. Keep in mind that each session this weekend will have a unique URL, so please refer to your registration confirmation emails for the link to each presentation. And if you haven't already signed up for that wine tasting tonight, there is still time. And I'm told if you're in the Oxford area that Oxford Wines has the selected wines in stock. So on behalf of the Miami University Alumni Association, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Gillian. Thank you, Cindy. Love and honor.
Thank you all. Love and honor.